Imagine standing in front of someone who seems to know you before you speak. Finish your sentence before your mind does. Reflect your values, your fears, your jokes, your pain, and somehow never seem to cross your boundaries. You feel connected. You feel seen. You feel safe. You feel like you have found someone who finally understands the rhythm of your mind. They do not just understand it. They move with it, breathe with it, and echo it back to you with perfect precision. And that is where the danger begins. The most effective manipulation tactics are never loud, never forceful, and never unfamiliar. They are slow, they are soft, and they are everything you want to believe. Mirroring, in the hands of someone with an agenda, becomes the most dangerous seduction you will ever face. Not because it forces you into anything, but because it convinces you that you chose it yourself. You lean in closer, believing you have found a soulmate, a twin flame, a friend who finishes your thoughts. But the truth is, what you are seeing is not a connection. What you are seeing is a mask, built from the pieces of you that you unknowingly gave away. In psychology, mirroring refers to the act of subtly imitating the behavior, expressions, and beliefs of another person in order to build rapport. On its surface, it is harmless. It is even helpful in therapy, negotiations, parenting, and coaching. It makes people feel accepted. It creates empathy. It builds bridges. But what happens when the bridge leads to a trap? What happens when mirroring is no longer a tool for connection, but a tactic of control? Every manipulator studies one thing before they strike. They study you. They learn your emotional rhythm. They map your emotional language. They analyze your insecurities, your traumas, your unmet needs, and your habits of trust. And then, they become the person you are most likely to trust. Not because they are that person, but because they are reflecting the version of you that needs to be loved. This tactic is not obvious. It is not a threat. It is not coercion. It is seduction, built on silence, precision, and patience. The brain loves familiarity. When someone reflects your facial expressions, gestures, values, or even pain, you unconsciously assume safety. You mistake recognition for intimacy. This is not your fault. Your mind evolved to survive by finding patterns, and your emotions evolved to trust those patterns. But when those patterns are used against you, you do not feel alarm. You feel love. That is what makes mirroring so dangerous. You do not run away. You lean in. You have probably heard this idea in simpler language. People like people who are like them. But what happens when someone is not actually like you? What happens when someone only studies what you want to see and shows you that perfectly until you are no longer looking at them? You are only seeing yourself. This is not a game of fake smiles or shallow mimicry. This is about identity theft of the soul. It is about psychological camouflage. It is about someone taking pieces of your vulnerability and constructing a version of themselves that makes you drop your guard. Once that happens, once you are emotionally invested, once your oxytocin levels spike and your brain labels this person as familiar, your boundaries become suggestions, not rules. You start to question yourself before you question them. You start to explain their behavior instead of examining it. You defend their silence, their lies, their shifts, because you are not trying to protect them. You are trying to protect the illusion of yourself. You soar inside them. You are trying to preserve the emotional high of being mirrored, even when the mirror starts to crack. If this makes you uncomfortable, it should, because the truth is, you have already met someone like this. Maybe in love, maybe in friendship, maybe in business, and maybe you are still in that connection now, unaware that the bond you trust is not real. But do not turn away yet. What if I told you that what you think you know about connection is wrong? What if the very people who make you feel most understood are the ones you should fear the most? Stay with me, because once you see the hidden design behind mirroring, you will never unsee it again. You have been taught since childhood that trust is built through connection, and connection is formed through familiarity, whether it is a shared interest, a common experience, or a similar way of thinking. You have been conditioned to believe that the people who resemble you are the ones who belong beside you. This belief does not come from logic. It comes from comfort. It comes from the mind's craving for recognition and the heart's desire to feel safe. You see it in relationships that bloom overnight, where two people say they feel like they have known each other forever. You see it in conversations where someone reflects your exact thought, your exact wound, your exact story. You feel seen. You feel validated. You feel chosen. But what you rarely consider is whether you are being understood or simply being studied. The lie that society repeats is simple, and it is dangerous. It tells you that when someone mirrors your emotions, your language, your rhythm, your dreams, your humor, your fears, or your silence, it is a sign of alignment. It tells you that this person is your people, your partner, your perfect match. The truth is far more unsettling. Mirroring is not always a sign of closeness. It is often a tactic of access. There are people who learn to mirror not because they care, but because they know it opens doors. They observe the way you speak. They echo your words. They mimic your tone. They reflect your values, not because they believe them, but because they know you do. And when that happens, when someone takes your emotional blueprint and wears it as their disguise, you feel connected to someone who does not exist. This is not a rare phenomenon. It is not a rare tactic. It is practiced, repeated, and studied in dark psychology. It is used in seduction. It is used in politics. It is used in cults. It is used in emotional manipulation. And it works, not because people are foolish, but because people are human. Your brain is wired to trust what it recognizes. Mirror neurons, discovered in the early 1990s, reveal how observing another person's behavior activates similar patterns in your own brain. When someone reflects you, your brain believes they are safe. When someone mirrors your emotional state, your nervous system calms. You attach before you evaluate. You trust before you understand. That is not weakness. That is biology. This is why manipulation tactics rooted in mirroring are so difficult to detect. You do not see them happening. You feel them working. You let the person in, not despite the warning signs, but because there are none. You do not hear lies. You hear yourself. And the more you hear yourself, the more you invest, the more you believe, the more you surrender. It is not until the mirror starts to distort that you feel something is off. But by then, it is too late. You have already given your trust. You have already opened your vulnerability. You have already fused their presence into your understanding of who you are. When the mirror finally cracks, it is not just the image of them that breaks. It is your image of yourself inside that relationship that falls apart. You were told that connection equals truth. You were told that familiarity is safety. You were told that reflection is real. But no one ever told you that someone can reflect you perfectly and still be hiding everything. No one told you that someone can appear as your emotional twin and still have no intention of protecting you. Now take a moment to let this settle, not just in your thoughts, but in your memory. Reflect on the moments where connection felt too easy, too instant, too perfect. Think about the people who seemed to complete you, yet left you feeling empty. If this speaks to you, if it stirs something honest beneath the surface, then pause and give space for it. Like this video. If the words feel familiar, subscribe if the silence in between them feels even more familiar. Comment with one moment, one bond, one reflection you now see through more clearly. And keep listening, because the tactic does not begin with deception. It begins with precision. Mirroring, in its most basic psychological definition, is the act of reflecting another person's behavior, posture, speech patterns, facial expressions, or emotional states. It begins as imitation, but it operates on a deeper level than simple copying. It taps into the neurological wiring of the human brain, triggering an unconscious sense of closeness and safety. At first glance, it appears harmless. In many therapeutic or social settings, it is even beneficial, but the deeper it goes unnoticed, the more power it holds. In social psychology, the term was made popular through the work of Tanya Chartrand and John Bargh, who described what they called the chameleon effect. Their studies showed that people who unconsciously mimic others tend to be better liked. The mimicry builds rapport, and rapport builds trust. But what begins as a harmless mechanism of connection becomes, in the wrong hands, a weapon of psychological manipulation. Manipulation tactics that rely on mirroring do not rely on force, guilt, or threat. They rely on subtlety. They use your own personality as a blueprint. A manipulator does not need to challenge your beliefs. They adopt them. They do not interrupt your thoughts. They support them. They do not offer resistance. They offer reflection. And because it feels like agreement, it disarms you. You do not see an enemy. You see resonance. You see harmony. You see someone who is just like you. But that perception is not real. It is constructed, and it is constructed with one goal in mind: control. Not immediate control, not visible control, emotional control. Once the manipulator has learned enough of your patterns, they begin to mirror them back to you with increasing accuracy. The more aligned they appear, the less you question their motives. The less resistance you offer, the more access they gain. This tactic works especially well in emotionally vulnerable states. People who are grieving, people who are lonely, people who are healing from trauma, often become easier targets for manipulative mirroring. Their need to be understood is heightened. Their defenses are down. The moment someone steps into their life and reflects their emotions back with perfect timing, their need for connection overtakes their need for caution. In romantic relationships, mirroring can feel like instant chemistry. The person you meet finishes your sentences. They love what you love. They hate what you hate. They tell you that you are different, that no one has ever seen them the way you do. In reality, they are simply reflecting the version of themselves they know you want. And when you believe it, you stop asking questions. In friendships or mentorships, the mirroring is less dramatic, but equally powerful. The manipulator will gradually adopt your preferences, your vocabulary, even your rhythm of thought. They will present themselves as aligned with your worldview. They will become the person who always agrees, always understands, always supports. And behind that reflection, they are collecting data. Your trust becomes their leverage. Your emotional openness becomes their advantage. The illusion is not built overnight. It is built through consistency, through repetition, through your own reinforcement. You begin to internalize the idea that this person is safe because they are like you, but they are not. They are only showing you what they have decided you need to see. The rest is withheld, hidden, controlled, and that is the danger. Mirroring does not show you who they are. It shows you who you want them to be. It replaces reality with projection. It replaces curiosity with familiarity. It turns emotional engagement into emotional dependence. And the longer it continues, the harder it becomes to separate where you end and where they begin. Let this idea settle for a moment. Think about the people in your life who seemed to fit too quickly. Think about the connections that formed without friction, without difference, without pause. Ask yourself, were you seeing them, or were you seeing yourself reflected back? And stay with this reflection, because once we enter the seduction phase, the stakes become higher, and the cost of not seeing becomes irreversible. There is a moment, subtle and quiet, when the mirror becomes more than reflection. It becomes seduction, not the kind of seduction built on charm or confidence, but the deeper kind, the one that reaches beneath your surface and speaks directly to your emotional core. This is where manipulation tactics begin to take shape in ways that feel nothing like manipulation. This is where mirroring evolves into something more dangerous, because you do not just see your reflection, you begin to trust it. Trust, in psychological terms, is not logical. It is hormonal. It is biological. It is built on patterns of safety. And when someone mirrors your emotional state with consistency and timing, your brain begins to assign them emotional credibility. You start to feel calm in their presence. You feel heard. You feel emotionally synchronized. The hormone oxytocin is released, reinforcing the experience of connection. But what your body interprets as bonding, a skilled manipulator understands as access. It begins with agreement. Agreement on values, agreement on struggles, agreement on how the world works. Slowly, the manipulator starts echoing your frustrations, your doubts, your disappointments. They do not offer solutions, they offer sympathy. They match your pace, they match your words, they match your pain. And in doing so, they position themselves not as a separate person, but as an extension of your emotional reality. This level of mirroring is not always visible. Sometimes, it is as simple as a shared silence, held just long enough to imply understanding. Sometimes, it is the way they pause when you do, breathe when you do, or look away at the same moment you look down. It is not the big gestures that gain your trust. It is the perfect imitation of your subtle emotional rhythm. That is what makes it powerful. In the seduction phase, you are not being convinced by argument. You are being drawn in by reflection, and the reflection is not neutral. It is tailored. Each layer is adjusted to mirror what you are most likely to bond with. If you value vulnerability, they become emotionally open. If you crave strength, they become stoic. If you long for stability, they become steady. They present themselves as what you never had, but always needed. And because it feels right, because it feels natural, you do not suspect it. This is not random behavior. It is a structured manipulation tactic, grounded in psychological understanding. Emotional mimicry, when used deliberately, activates trust circuits in the brain. Your defenses relax, your perception narrows. You begin to view this person not only as safe, but as essential. They become the one who gets you, who hears you, who feels you. And once you internalize that belief, you begin to rely on it. You attach, you lean in, you lower your guard. The problem is not that you trust too easily. The problem is that you trust what feels familiar. And when familiarity is artificially manufactured, your trust is not based on truth. It is based on design. This design is subtle. It is invisible to those who are emotionally invested. That is why it works. Over time, you stop noticing differences. You stop asking questions. You start to feel like you have found someone who completes you. But completion is not the goal. Control is. Because once a manipulator has earned your trust through mirroring, they begin to shift the dynamic. Not by force, but by quiet influence. Your decisions become shared. Your boundaries become flexible. Your emotions become tools they can activate or suppress. And you begin to lose your ability to tell where your feelings end and their influence begins. You might believe that if something feels right, it must be right. But feeling right is not proof of truth. It is often the result of alignment, and alignment can be performed. That is what makes this phase so dangerous. You are not falling for them. You are falling for the version of yourself they are reflecting. Now take a moment to remember the times you felt deeply connected to someone, almost instantly. Think about how quickly you trusted them, how easily you shared, how strongly you believed that this person understood your world. You were not being reckless, you were being mirrored, and what comes next is not more comfort, but the beginning of emotional exposure. Because once your guard is down, once your trust is established, the mask begins to shift, and the real tactic begins to unfold in silence. Empathy, when real, is a form of human light. It softens conflict, builds understanding, and holds space for pain without demanding something in return. It is the foundation of meaningful relationships and psychological healing. But in the hands of a manipulator, empathy becomes something else entirely. It becomes camouflage, it becomes strategy, it becomes the tool they use to gain access, not to comfort you but to control you. This is where mirroring reaches its darkest form. At first the mimicry was social, then it became emotional, but now it becomes empathetic. It mimics your inner life. It copies your sadness, your loneliness, your joy, your guilt. It tracks your insecurities and repeats them back to you in a voice that sounds like comfort. But there is no healing in this version of empathy. There is only attachment. This is not compassion, it is performance. The manipulator learns how you express pain, how you grieve, how you hide, how you speak when you are afraid, and they mirror that behavior with just enough delay to make it feel authentic. You think they have felt what you feel, but they have only studied the structure of your emotions. Their empathy is not rooted in shared suffering. It is rooted in observation. It is important to understand what this does to the victim. When empathy is weaponized, it creates a psychological loop of trust that becomes increasingly hard to break. The victim not only feels seen, they feel rescued. The manipulator becomes the emotional anchor. Every small moment of understanding builds a larger structure of dependence. The victim begins to believe that this connection is rare, even sacred, and so they hold on, even when the relationship begins to hurt. In many cases, this tactic is used by individuals with narcissistic traits, particularly covert narcissism. These individuals are skilled at presenting emotional sensitivity while lacking emotional depth. They listen to your story, but only to learn your script. They respond with the right tone, but not with real concern. They use your emotions to create a sense of unity, then slowly rewrite your boundaries from the inside out. The result is a deep confusion. You feel close to them, but distant from yourself. You feel emotionally bonded, but also emotionally manipulated. And because the empathy felt so real, you begin to question your own judgment. This is the most damaging part of the experience. The victim does not just lose trust in the manipulator, they lose trust in their own ability to discern authenticity. That internal confusion creates a vulnerability that can be exploited again and again. In the philosophical sense, this becomes a question of reality. If someone reflects your soul, even falsely, do they still exist as someone real in your emotional memory? Or do they become an echo, a hollow presence that feels meaningful only because it mirrored something you needed at the time? It is a terrifying idea that the people who made you feel most understood were never really there at all. And still, your memory defends them. Your mind replays the conversations, the shared laughter, the moments of vulnerability. You try to separate the manipulation from the moments that felt good, but they are woven together. That is the design. The reflection of empathy is meant to make you feel cared for, even when control is the true motive. This is why victims often return, not because they are weak, but because they are emotionally trained to associate the manipulator with validation. The abuser becomes the source of comfort and the cause of pain, and once that loop is established, it becomes difficult to escape without emotional damage. You must understand, this tactic is not theoretical, it is real. It happens in romantic relationships, in mentorships, in therapy, in family, in cults, in leadership, and in social influence. It happens in silence, without confrontation, without resistance. It is invisible to the outside world. Now hold this in your awareness. Think about someone in your past who made you feel deeply known, who always responded with the right words, the perfect silence, the gentle understanding. You may have believed it was love, but love does not need to imitate you to hold you. Because once the empathy has done its job, once your walls are lowered, the next stage begins. It is no longer about matching you. It becomes about using you. Once mirroring has built the illusion of intimacy, once weaponized empathy has dissolved your skepticism, a more subtle form of manipulation begins. You are no longer just interacting with someone who reflects your behavior. You are now forming an emotional attachment to the version of yourself you see inside them. This is where the trap takes hold, not in their behavior, but in your mind's response to it. The psychological term for this is self-projection. It is the process of assigning your own feelings, intentions, or traits onto another person. In healthy relationships, projection is minimal and often corrected through real interaction. But in a dynamic built on manipulative mirroring, projection becomes the entire foundation. You begin to believe that the other person feels the same way, cares the same way, suffers the same way, simply because you see yourself in them. This is not love, it is emotional hypnosis. Your mind is no longer analyzing their behavior. It is filling in the gaps with assumptions that serve your emotional needs. You convince yourself that the connection is mutual, that the bond is equal, that the relationship is genuine, but what you are holding on to is not them. You are holding on to your own reflection, and that reflection becomes addictive. Every time the manipulator mirrors your emotions, your brain rewards you. Dopamine is released. Oxytocin builds attachment. You feel seen, not because they see you, but because you see yourself. The more you invest, the stronger the emotional hook becomes, and like any form of addiction, it blinds you to danger. This tactic works most powerfully when combined with intermittent reinforcement. The manipulator does not offer constant validation. They offer it in waves. They mirror you deeply for a while, then withdraw. They reflect your joy, then suddenly go cold. They align with your values, then break them without explanation. And each time you feel the disconnection, your mind scrambles to restore the bond. You do not see it as manipulation. You see it as a temporary misunderstanding. You want the mirror back. You chase it. That is how the emotional hook is set. You are not addicted to the person. You are addicted to the feeling of being understood. And because they created that feeling so perfectly, you believe only they can give it to you again. This belief locks you in place. You stop resisting. You stop questioning. You begin to justify the harm. You explain away the shifts. You convince yourself that the connection is still real, even when the reflection has disappeared. This is not an intellectual failure. It is an emotional capture. Your nervous system is involved. Your identity is involved. And your history is involved. For many, the manipulator is not just a mirror of their present. They are a reflection of their past. They resemble the parent who never saw them, the partner who betrayed them, the friend who disappeared. And in that emotional repetition, you try to resolve an old wound. But the manipulator has no interest in healing, only in holding you. Now consider this. When you long for someone who hurt you, are you missing them, or are you missing the version of yourself you saw through their eyes? The one who was loved, understood, completed. That version becomes the drug. That version keeps you chasing. This is how the psychological trap is maintained. You are not fighting the manipulator. You are fighting to protect your emotional illusion. You want the mirror to stay perfect, because without it, you are forced to see what was real and what never was. Take time with this thought. Look back at the connections that once felt magnetic. Trace the path between their reflection and your need. Ask yourself if you were ever truly seen, or if you were simply shown what you needed just long enough to become dependent on it. Because what follows is not just emotional confusion. It is the quiet erosion of your identity. And by the time the signs become visible, the damage has already begun. When mirroring is used as a manipulation tactic, it becomes increasingly difficult to tell what is real and what is manufactured. The experience feels genuine. It feels deeply personal. It feels like love. But underneath the surface, the signs of artificial reflection begin to show. They are not loud. They do not come with warnings. They emerge slowly, in moments of discomfort, silence, and contradiction. One of the earliest signs is intensity without history. The connection feels deep, yet it formed too quickly. You feel emotionally bonded, but you cannot explain why. The person seems to understand you with unusual precision. They repeat back your beliefs, your dreams, your fears, with a level of clarity that seems impossible for someone who barely knows you. This is not coincidence. It is design. Another sign is the absence of real conflict. You never disagree. They always agree with you. They never challenge your values. They never bring up opposing views. At first it feels peaceful. Later it feels strange. But by the time you notice, you are already emotionally invested. You have told them too much. You have trusted too fast. And your mind begins to explain the perfection instead of questioning it. Pay attention to how often they use your own language. Not just phrases, but emotional vocabulary. If you say you feel abandoned, they will describe their experiences in the same way. If you talk about your trauma, they will tell a story that mirrors it. They are not lying about everything, but they are selectively crafting a version of themselves that reflects what you most need to connect with. That reflection is not who they are. It is who they become around you. In moments of emotional distress, watch how they respond. Do they truly support you? Or do they mirror your pain to stay close to your emotions? When you cry, do they cry When you feel broken, do they echo the same wound? At first it feels like empathy. Over time it feels like they are always becoming your reflection, instead of being themselves. That is not intimacy. That is manipulation. Manipulators who use mirroring often lack consistency in their deeper identity. When you step back, you realize that their personality shifts, depending on who they are with. They reflect one person to you, another to someone else. Their preferences change, their stories evolve, their values adapt. What remains the same is their ability to always appear aligned with whoever they want to influence. Another subtle sign is your growing discomfort with silence. When the mirroring slows down, when they stop reflecting you so closely, you feel uneasy. You begin to question what changed. You feel like something is missing. That discomfort is not because they withdrew. It is because your emotional addiction to your own reflection has been interrupted. You miss the person, not because of who they are, but because of how you felt about yourself in their presence. You may also notice a lack of emotional depth when the conversation moves away from you. They are fully engaged when you talk about your inner world, but vague when you ask about theirs. Their stories lack detail. Their emotions seem borrowed. They hesitate when asked to reveal something vulnerable, and slowly you begin to realize that you know very little about them, despite feeling close. These signs are not proof, but they are patterns. They do not mean someone is always manipulating you, but when too many of these patterns appear together, you must pay attention. Not because you need to confront them, but because you need to protect your clarity. Now take a moment to reflect on a past connection that felt intense, immediate, emotionally synchronized. Think about how quickly you trusted, how little you questioned, how often you heard your own voice reflected back. Then think about how that story ended. If it ended with confusion, with emotional exhaustion, with a loss of self, you were likely mirrored. Write down that moment, not for blame, not for regret, but for awareness. Because once you name the experience, you stop living under its influence. And what comes next is not about anger or revenge. It is about understanding the cost. The price of being mirrored is rarely visible at the beginning. It does not strike like a sudden betrayal. It unfolds in fragments, in confusion, in emotional fog. What felt like love becomes exhaustion. What felt like connection becomes disorientation. And by the time you begin to question what was real, you are already carrying the psychological cost. The aftermath of manipulation through mirroring is not just heartbreak. It is a fracture of perception. You begin to doubt your memory. You wonder if you missed the signs. You replay conversations, trying to find where truth ended and performance began. But there is no clear moment. The manipulation was gradual. The reflection was constant. And the loss you feel is not only about them. It is about the version of yourself that felt understood and emotionally safe. This is what makes the damage so profound. You do not simply mourn the person. You mourn the illusion. You mourn the feeling of being mirrored. That sense of emotional recognition, of being seen without explanation, is rare. And once it is taken away, the emptiness left behind is not just painful, it is destabilizing. Many victims describe this stage as identity confusion. They do not know who they are without the mirror. Their emotions feel scattered. Their thoughts loop around questions that have no answer. Why did it feel so real? Why did they say those things? Was any of it true? The emotional clarity they once felt becomes clouded by uncertainty. In this fog, self-blame often appears. You tell yourself you should have seen it. You should have asked more questions. You should have moved slower. But those thoughts come from hindsight. They come from pain. The truth is, your mind trusted what it was supposed to trust. It followed emotional patterns that were designed for connection. What you believed was not foolish. It was human. This is where psychological fragmentation can occur. When your trust is violated by someone who mirrored you, you do not just lose them. You lose confidence in your emotional instincts. You begin to question your ability to read people. You hesitate before forming new connections. You fear being manipulated again, and that fear becomes a quiet background presence in every future relationship. In more severe cases, this experience can contribute to symptoms of trauma. Emotional flashbacks, sleep disturbances, anxiety and dissociation are not uncommon. These symptoms do not always come from what was done to you directly. They come from the psychological rupture between what you believed and what was real. They come from the betrayal of your emotional blueprint. Healing from this type of manipulation requires more than time. It requires clarity. It requires understanding how your own needs were used against you. It requires seeing the tactic not as a failure on your part, but as a system of psychological design. And above all, it requires separating your worth from the reflection that was given to you. You are not defined by how well someone mirrored you. You are defined by what remains when the mirror is gone. That core self, the one who sought connection, who wanted to be seen, who believed in emotional safety, is still intact. That self deserves protection, not shame. Take a deep breath and hold on to that thought. You are not broken because you were mirrored. You are wiser now because you understand the pattern. And when the time comes again, when someone feels too familiar too soon, you will not rush. You will observe, you will feel, but you will no longer hand over your reflection without understanding who is standing behind the glass. Because the next time you see yourself in someone's eyes, you will remember what it cost to believe the last mirror. Manipulation tactics that rely on mirroring are not effective by accident. They work because they exploit the way your mind is built. They hijack your biology, your emotional programming, your social instincts, and your unconscious beliefs about trust. Once you see how this system operates, the illusion begins to lose power. But first you must understand why it felt so real. Human beings are social by nature. From infancy, survival depends on connection. Eye contact, facial mimicry, vocal tone, and shared gestures all contribute to bonding. These are not just social behaviors, they are neurological processes. Mirror neurons, first discovered by Giacomo Rizzolatti and his team in the early 1990s, reveal that when you observe someone performing an action, your brain lights up as if you are performing the same action yourself. This mechanism was designed to foster empathy, learning, and social connection. But it also creates a weakness. When someone mirrors your behavior, your brain does not recognize it as imitation. It interprets it as alignment. The same response occurs emotionally. When your feelings are echoed back to you, your nervous system registers safety. You begin to let go, you begin to trust. And that trust is not a decision. It is a neurological response. This is why manipulative mirroring feels so natural. It bypasses logic and moves directly into emotional familiarity. That familiarity activates a bias called the similarity attraction effect. This is the tendency to feel closer to people who seem to share your values, interests, and emotional language. Studies in social psychology show that even minor similarities, such as shared preferences or body posture, can increase likability and trust. A manipulator who understands this can replicate those signals with frightening accuracy. Another factor is emotional projection. You fill in gaps based on what you want to believe. You assume mutual care, mutual depth, mutual feeling, because it feels good to do so. This is not self-deception. It is emotional vulnerability being exploited. The more someone reflects what you long to experience, the less likely you are to question it. But the most powerful mechanism at work is the human fear of loneliness. Connection is not just a preference, it is a need. And when someone mirrors you with intensity, when they reflect your emotional language, your silence, your rhythm, your humor, your pain, they do not feel like a stranger, they feel like home, and no one wants to lose home. This is why the manipulator does not need to pressure you. They simply need to reflect you long enough for your biology to do the rest. You bond with the reflection, you build memories around it, you defend it. Even when the cracks appear, your mind still returns to the feeling of being mirrored. That feeling becomes the proof you use to stay. Now take this moment and look inward. Ask yourself, what part of you is most easily seduced by recognition? What version of yourself do you long to see in someone else's eyes? Write it down, not to expose yourself, but to protect yourself. That is the part the manipulator will target. That is the part they will reflect. You are not weak for having this part. You are human. But once you recognize it, you regain control. You no longer hand over your emotions without understanding who is listening and why. Because the tactic works in silence. It works in speed. It works in emotional resonance. But once the design is exposed, once the reflection is understood as performance, the mirror begins to crack, and what you see behind it will never look the same again. Now you understand what it means to be mirrored, not in beauty, not in kindness, but in silence, in precision, in emotional architecture, built to reflect you back to yourself, with just enough clarity to win your trust. The tactic is invisible when it begins. It does not arrive with warning signs. It arrives with warmth, with eyes that see too much, with voices that sound too familiar, with timing that never misses. You were not supposed to notice. You were supposed to feel, and you did. You felt connection. You felt chemistry. You felt recognized. But what you were feeling was not always truth. It was performance. It was alignment by design. It was empathy without substance. The manipulation tactic was not to overpower you but to become you. And once that happened, resistance was no longer necessary. But now you see it. The pattern, the mask, the illusion. And with that clarity, the next step is yours. Not theirs, yours. You are not defined by the pain of being mirrored. You are defined by what you do with the knowledge that followed. You are defined by your ability to slow down, to question what feels too perfect, to protect the parts of you that once begged to be reflected. That longing is still inside you, and that longing still matters. But it no longer needs to be fulfilled by someone who wears your face only to own your trust. You must choose what happens next, not with revenge, not with fear, with awareness, with caution, with emotional discipline. You will meet others who mirror. Some will mean well, some will not. You will feel the old pull, the old rhythm, the old comfort, but you will not move blindly anymore. You will see the reflection for what it is, a signal, not a truth. And in that pause, in that breath before belief, you reclaim what was taken. You reclaim your ability to perceive. If you made it to this point, then you are not the same person who began this video. You see more, you know more, you understand more. And with that, I ask something simple. Like this video, if you felt even one memory shift in your mind, share it with someone who keeps wondering why they feel so confused after being close to someone who always seemed too perfect. And subscribe to join the unraveling of more dark truths. Not because you seek drama, but because you seek understanding. There are more stories like this. Stories about tactics most people never see. Stories that pull the mind apart and reveal what has been hidden in plain sight. And I will tell them, but only to those who are ready to listen without illusion. Until then, stay awake, stay slow, and stay careful of anyone who seems to feel like home too quickly. The mirror always shows what you want to see first. The reflection that follows is never the same.